Without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic over to our esteemed curators. We have Dr. Janine Coy-Felsen, who is a research fellow at Melbourne Sustainable Society Institute and also former ambassador for Belize to the United Nations. And we also have Mr. Stig Travit, who's the director of the Department for Climate, Energy and Environment of the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, and also the former ambassador of Norway to Indonesia. So I'm really excited for today's event. I hope you are too. And I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic over to Ambassador Felsen to get us kicked off. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Willow, for the introduction. And let me also add my welcome to all the participants. Some names are already very familiar to me, and so I'm very pleased that you all have been able to join us at this hour of the day, whether morning, evening, or afternoon for you. It is a pleasure for me to co-curate this dialogue together with Stig Travik from NORAD. And in this role, I have very basic responsibilities. At the outset, I want to get you caught up to speed with the summit and these dialogues. And then I want to address the today's dialogue itself. So as you know, the Food Systems Summit is one of the first milestones in the Decade of Action for Sustainable Development. It will be convened in September 2021. And I think my colleagues here will be putting up a timeline for you to get a sense of what's involved in this Food Systems Summit process. So stakeholder engagement is absolutely fundamental to the preparatory phase for the summit. And the Food Systems Summit dialogues are a core element of that engagement process. And there are 3 different formats for that dialogue. The format that you're engaged in today is called the Independent Dialogue. Regardless of whichever format that's taken, the aim is the same. And that is to provide people with the opportunity to engage in the summit in a meaningful way. Following an independent dialogue, a report is generated that is fed up to the Food Systems Summit Secretariat, which will then analyze, synthesize reports, identify common themes, important insights, propose actions, and potential solutions that cut across the dialogue, as well as informing locally owned actions after the summit is over. So you are being heard, a report will be captured, and for now it seems as though that report may also be able to be viewed publicly. Today's dialogue focuses now on centering small-scale fisheries in national food and nutrition plans. And I think it's really important for us to really understand why small-scale fisheries. I don't need to tell any one of you this, but I think it's important that we start from the recognition of the significant contributions that small-scale fisheries have had in providing food, nutrition, and employment. And this is especially true in developing countries. As you know, the FAO puts out a report regularly about the state of the world fisheries, and it has noted that small-scale fisheries account for about half of global fish catches and employ more than 90% of people employed in fisheries, about half of them being women. In some communities, such as in small island developing states, it is the principal source of income and food security. But I think more than that, fishing is a way of life. It is a tradition. It's integrally tied to culture and identity. And I think it's very important to have that perspective when we speak about small-scale fisheries. So FAO estimates that about 97% of small-scale fishers are found in developing countries, with many small-scale fishing communities experiencing high levels of poverty and being overlooked with regard to resource management, but also from the broader social and economic development perspectives. And as it was indicated in the descriptor to this dialogue, these communities tend to exhibit acute vulnerability to issues such as climate change. So in the Sustainable Development Goals, there is a specific target to address the challenges that small-scale fishers face. And in doing so, that agenda basically acknowledges the contribution of small-scale fisheries to advancing the broader sustainable development agenda. So why now? Why have this dialogue now? I think it's important to recognize that the Food Summit is not only a milestone in the Decade of Action, but it is also a first major opportunity to elevate and enhance the contributions of small-scale fishers and fisheries. It's important, yes, to hear your voices. It's important, though, to have you at the table within the context of the larger global processes. I think it's also important to look to consider the relevance of other processes, just consider how the ideas that are generated through the food system, summit system process can be taken forward, advanced, or elaborated in other processes such as the UN Decade of Ocean Science, the second UN Ocean Conference, and of course the 2022 International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture. So today's dialogue, as you've been advised, provides a unique opportunity to bring together the small-scale fishers, key decision makers who are engaged with fisheries management and food and nutrition policies to consider what can be done to better utilize and support small-scale fisheries in national food and nutrition plans. I encourage you to share your experiences and ideas so that we can make the inputs to the summit representative of a wide range of perspectives and enhance its overall inclusivity. So I thank you, and I now pass the floor over to Stig. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Felsen. I was very excited when you say that fisheries is a way of life, and I think this is something that will always resonate with the Norwegians. You will tend to see that Norwegians get very excited when people start talking about fisheries. So let me start a little bit with our experience. And I think the reason we're so connected to it is that our whole history is related to fisheries. We were fisher folk and fisher farmers before we became Vikings and after we were Vikings. We were fisher folk before the oil age, and we will continue to be connected to the sea as a way of life once the oil age is over. So this is something very connected to the way of life in Norway. And we've had our own ups and downs. Already last century, we had to start regulating fisheries due to overfishing. In the beginning, with quite crude measures, and then by increasingly sophisticated ways of regulating fisheries to the advantage of small-scale fisher folk, as well as to the sustainability of the fisheries industry. And also we managed to collaborate with neighboring countries in doing this. Also for Norway in development, the connection to fisheries is strong. Actually, the first few Norwegian development projects ever were in the fisheries sector in Kerala in India, actually. So this is something that is close to our heart. We've also been collaborating with the UN system over the years on fisheries. I really would thank the organizers of the UN Food Summit for giving this opportunity to really put more emphasis on fisheries, and for EDF for facilitating this dialogue. Just when we discuss this, I think it's important that we recognize that national and local food systems, yes, they're national and local, but they're also connected to the global system. I think the Food System Summit later this year is a good opportunity to put the spotlight on this, how sustainability of food from the oceans is important for all of us, and how we need to rig the system for small fisher folk instead of, as to a large extent now, against them. For us, we have in Norway, we launched recently an action plan on sustainable food systems 2 years ago, recognizing some of the challenges in international food systems in general, and also in terms of food from the sea. We didn't know at the time that this would be even more relevant than we thought at the time. Of course, due to COVID-19, COVID-19 and the aftermath of that. An increasing number of people in the world are now facing potential poverty and potential food insecurity. So I think the backdrop of our conversation today is important, it's serious, and I'm very happy that we now have this opportunity. I think I'm now going to get a few slides up on the screen to describe the agenda. So our first presenter is going to be Pip Cohen from World Fish. She's a renowned expert in the field. She's the research leader at World Fish. She is a research fellow at the Australian Research Council, the Centre of Excellence for Coral Reef Studies at James Cook University. And she's someone who has a deep understanding of how global governance and resilience of small-scale fisheries are important to us. She's conducted empirical research in Australia, Tonga, Timor-Leste, Solomon Islands, and works with researchers globally. So am I handing the floor over to Pip now, or do I have another slide first?
I think it'd be great if you could introduce all three presenters first, okay, and then we'll pass the mic. Thank you.
Okay. The next presenter is Diana Delgadillo from the Hunger Project. She leads the strategic research management team at the Hunger Project in Mexico, and she works to end hunger and extreme poverty for rural and indigenous communities throughout Mexico. She's been working throughout her career in international cooperation processes, including on the Sustainable Development Goals and on the role in women in community resilience. Food security and human rights and adequate food has been central to her research. So welcome, Diane. Next slide, please. Then we have Marco Ide Mayorga. He's from the Interregional Federation of Artisanal Fishermen of the South. So I'm really happy that Marco is going to be with us as well, to have a real practitioner. So thank you to Marco for being here, and thank you to EDF for really thinking about including the people who are out there. He's a long-time fisherman. He's a leader of the of artisanal fishing at the national level. He's also the founder of the Federation of Artisanal Fishermen of the South. And he's the president of the Federation and a member of the National Fisheries Council, National Council of the MOP, and vice president of the Los Rios CRDP. So with that, I hand the floor back to you, Willow, or directly to the first speaker. Up to you.
We can just go straight to Pip. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ambassador Travis.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for the introduction, Ambassador Felsen and Ambassador Travik. A pleasure to speak on this panel. Thank you for the invitation. So I'm a colleague of many great fisheries, food and nutrition researchers, and I will present from that perspective, so the perspective of a researcher. So I want to start with the idea of a food system. So this incorporates the environment, processes, institutions and people and their activities in production, processing, distribution and consumption of food. The food system is an important concept for us in this discussion that we'll have tonight for me, morning for others, because it helps us to see many more entry points. It helps us to see more challenges and more opportunities for active improved outcomes. So it helps us also to move beyond the persistent but narrow hope that just by improving production or quantities of food will improve nutrition. That is insufficient. So, but first, why are we here? Is there a compelling reason why small-scale fisheries should be central to food, nutrition and other national policies, as Ambassador Felsen did introduce? And for what outcomes and for whom is that going to be particularly important? So the fish that small-scale fishers and fish workers shepherd through food systems have a particular niche in diets. Fish is not a go-to food as an energy source. You're not going to take fish necessarily when you go bushwalking as an immediate hit of calories or kilojoules, but it is the micronutrients and essential fatty acids that fish contain that bring positive health benefits to populations around the world, and also make fish incredibly valuable for addressing micronutrient deficiencies, or what's called hidden hunger. This has substantial individual and societal costs that are incredibly stark and unfortunately persistent for economically vulnerable populations, for certain regions like sub-Saharan Africa, and for particular people, especially women of reproductive age and young children. Next slide, thanks. Small-scale fisheries continue to generate and distribute food and income where formal markets and global supply chains don't function well. So they also provide a key coping strategy in the face of shocks. And some of the shocks that we've seen and still many are experiencing in the face of COVID and the breakdown of markets, small-scale fisheries can provide an important food source and fallback livelihood. So, as Ambassador Felsen mentioned, FAO has estimated that there may be 60 million people employed in small-scale fisheries, but new estimates emerging from the Illuminating Hidden Harvest initiative suggest that there could be more than twice that number of people, of women and men, drawing livelihoods from small-scale fisheries if we look across the whole food system. So women and men around the world will continue to rely on small-scale fisheries for livelihoods and food for decades to come, despite the growth in aquaculture and despite the growth in alternative sources of protein. And this is particular in nations in sub-Saharan Africa, countries of the mega deltas of Asia, and also small island states of the Pacific. Commitments have been made. There have been years of discussions before now that have made explicit commitments to small-scale fisheries and the nutrition functions and values that they hold. So, for example, small-scale fisheries are explicitly mentioned within Target 2.3 of Sustainable Development Goal 2 on ending hunger, and they're also explicitly mentioned in 14B of Sustainable Development Goal 14 on life below water. The voluntary guidelines on the responsible governance of tenure of land, fisheries and forests in the context of national food security, and also, and most obviously, the commitments made in the voluntary guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries in the context of food security and poverty eradication. So at the global level, I would love to assume that the UN Food Systems Summit, the funders that are interested in the findings, the respective action tracks that are already, and the respective action tracks are already holding onto these commitments. And I hope as well that nations and regional responses and surges of action that might follow will also hold these commitments in the forefront. It would be irresponsible, I would argue, if these commitments or their national and regional equivalents are sidelined. Nonetheless, the Illuminating Hidden Harvest initiative and other research has found that globally less than half of national dietary guidelines mention fish at all, and none mention small-scale fisheries. So there is still a long way to go to meet in even the shallowest of ways some of these commitments that are being made. So next slide, thanks. So let's assume that we have been successful and the currently aquatic food blind or small-scale fisheries blind policies are a thing of the past. Here are some key points that I would bring, or the research that my colleagues bring, that span the food system and that are coming out of new and emerging research. So centering small-scale fisheries in national food and nutrition policy will entail much more than just mentioning the actors or mentioning fish. So these points are really about, well, what really needs to be done here, what kinds of actions will be spoken about, and what kinds of actions, initiatives and structures will be enabled by changes in national policies. So number one is that these national policies should explicitly deal with social difference. So differences in gender, age and wealth, because we know these affect people's ability to benefit from food systems and their different nutritional needs. In paper that in research led by Christina Hicks, we found that where food and fisheries policies did explicitly deal with gender, age and wealth, there were greater experiences of justice in blue food systems, or outcomes in blue food systems were more just. We need to address loss and waste. This will most definitely come out of the UN Food Systems Summit, but we need to ensure that in national policies are dealing with the technical side, but as well as the social causes and exacerbants of waste and loss. So some work coming out of Zambia that I've cited here shows that in dealing with waste and loss, you also need to deal with some of the gendered aspects of that waste and loss. We need to be dealing with distribution of quality foods, particularly ensuring quality foods like fish or fish-based products are reaching the nutritionally, those that are most vulnerable nutritionally. So a recent paper out only last week showed that fish powder and fish chutney could reach women, and small amounts could make a substantial difference to nutrition. This was mentioned by both ambassadors, that livelihoods and well-being of actors in the food system is a critical, will be critical to keep sight on. I think it's going to be really important that not only do we, as Abigail Bennett's paper recently pointed out, we can't just think about fish and as a commodity, but also as a food. But we can't just focus on the values or the nutrients that are moving through food systems. We also need to keep sight on the experiences of those actors and their livelihoods within food systems. We also need to ensure that national policies are looking at processes and structures that enable inclusive, equitable and accountable governance, and that small-scale fisheries actors are key in determining, in identifying and in implementing some of the solutions within food systems. And a last point is that we need to ensure at national levels, but also in the international development community, that there are appropriate investments in small-scale fisheries that are fitting these needs and these opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pip, for really giving us a good overview of what a food system is, how small-scale fisheries and fishers fit into that, and then a very helpful list of recommendations of how to look at national food and nutrition policies moving forward. So thank you very much for that. And I will now quickly transition over to Diana Delgadillo. Diana, you have the floor. And just a reminder for you folks who wish to listen to the presentation in Spanish, you will not need to turn on interpretation, but for those who wish to have interpretation, you will need to click on the English channel to have that English interpretation. So over to you, Diana.
Thank you, Janine. Muchas gracias por la invitación al Environmental Defense Fund, por la oportunidad de compartir esta mañana con
Thank you, Janine, and thank you for the invitation of Environmental Defense Fund to cover these topics. Special greeting to Pete Coyne and Marco Mayorga. Thank you for sharing this part of the dialogue. In the interest of time, I would like to convey 4 specific messages. Because of time, I cannot dwell on them, but at least to leave them there for what's coming up with the dialogue. And these are ideas that go beyond this conversation regarding the specific dialogue. The first one, the transformation of food systems. In order for them to have a systemic view, they need to make visible all the stakeholders that make it up with its specificities. And it's not only from the stage of production, transformation, and commercialization, but I'm referring to all the actors engaged in the process. And to deepen in small-scale fisheries is necessary in order to transform those food systems so that they can have the leadership of these fishing communities. In countries such as Mexico and all those countries with large ocean extensions, and this is item 2, it is necessary to consider the construction of productive systems and sustainable production in order to guarantee access to seafood. And this goes through the dimension of avoiding a progressive production that will hinder the natural balance of the sea that is also affected by climate change. The next point is that development takes place locally, the transformation of regulatory frameworks in countries with a presence of small-scale fisheries required to consider the local view in order to build an adequate framework of support and incentives, and this will be food support that is healthy and of easy access. The fourth point is in this transformation of local leaderships, we must consider the role of women, and it is important to ask how to transform the power relationships within the scope of small-scale fisheries in order to guarantee inclusive practices. And obviously, these 4 ideas really are affected because of the moment we're living with COVID-19. I didn't want to leave that out. Hence, I'm going to focus on these 4 ideas in a more specific manner. The first idea on the broad transformation of food systems and to make visible small-scale fisheries. First, the moment that is being built globally in these dialogues in the preparation for the summit enables us to identify the gaps in the existing productive models. We need to frame all this discussion in the right to food, the right to a healthy life, in addition to the right to having a healthy environment and the potential productivity of the fishing sector. It indeed requires this specific framework. Pete talked about a global framework that talks about fishing, but there are other frameworks like voluntary systems in nutrition and food that will be presented in the summit, and they have a footnote that sets forth that this document, when it refers to agriculture, it includes agriculture, livestock, forestry, activity, fishing, and aquaculture. We understand that this is a way to make things more systematic, but we cannot leave aside the language built. And to the extent that you have specific frameworks for the sector, then we will also have specific proposals and actions based on specific needs, mainly dealing with the global framework and the local frameworks. This visibility requires to transform power relationships within the dominant food system, where small scale doesn't count on sufficient conditions to compete in spite of it being effective with large producers. The consideration of small-scale fisheries shares many difficulties that are also faced by farmers because the programmatic and regulatory frameworks that affect them are very limited and they do not consider their specific situations and needs. On the second point, here there is a link between the recognition of artisanal fishing and a context that will facilitate small-scale fisheries. And here we have to cover different elements. Latin America is the region in which access to healthy food is 3 times more costly than in other regions of the world, according to FAO data. So access to nutritious and healthy food of easy access should become a priority for the region, and it is a very relevant opportunity for the so-called blue food to have a specific space in the reconfiguration of food systems. On the other hand, thinking about the productive capacity of the countries with large coast, which is the case of Mexico, we'll think that there are more productive capabilities, but we cannot leave aside the sustainable use of these fishing practices that will take into account the reduction of fish banks because of an exaggerated exploitation. And as a consequence of this, there is a loss of biodiversity. The governance agreements and regulatory frameworks are indeed necessary in order to have fiscal incentives for small production, to have also a public procurement, local fish, local dishes, local baskets, and how to guarantee a larger scope that is to focus on the distribution of the food coming from the sea that will guarantee income to small-scale fisheries and will also guarantee adequate food and will guarantee sustainable practices. The necessary governance arrangements need the leadership of those living of fishing, and the gender part should be taken into account, and the construction of local leadership, and to have men and women defining their priorities and defining the types of priorities and the effects that this could have on their activities. It is necessary for a formulation of policies where one of the first areas on which it is necessary to focus on is to guarantee that there are sufficient participation opportunities. As the third item, I believe that development takes place locally. If you do not take into account local priorities, then you lose the possibilities of a sustainable use of resources at sea, and hence self-consumption, food that could be used for marketing, and you lose the traditional knowledge of fishing communities, because there is a concept about the environment and the vision that people who participate in these activities of small-scale fisheries is lost. But that is the outlook that must prevail in regulatory frameworks, in the definition of public policies, from the productive dimension all the way to the right to food. At last, as we have said, the need to transform the relationships of power between small and large producers. We cannot leave aside the power relationships within the groups that live in those communities and that also limit women. And that is an aspect where it coincides with other claims. Women have less possibilities of having access, in the case of agriculture, of having access to land, and in the case of small-scale production, to have access to sufficient resources, training, credit, which will facilitate its activity, even though they are also carrying out this type of activities. I mean, they need food security, they need also income. So thank you very much for allowing me to share these ideas, which enable us to present the different links. And they go beyond food, and it has to do to the right of information, to the right to food, to a dignifying life under the leadership of communities. So I'm going to stop now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Diana, and thank you for pointing out all of these interconnections between issues in fisheries and food systems. In the interest of time, I'll hand the floor right over to the next speaker, to Marco Ide Mayorga. Just remind you that if you want to have interpretation, you need to click on the little globe for interpretation, or if you want to switch it off, click the same place. Over to you, Marco.
Sí, muchas gracias por la invitación. Saludar a todos.
Thank you very much to this invitation. I want to thank all the members of the panel and all those who have joined this important event. Sometimes we forget where we are. Can I have the first slide, please? Yes, can I have the next slide, please? Yes, I prefer to do it myself, but anyhow. Sometimes we forget where we are. This is our home. This is the only home. There you have two lines. Oceans occupy 71% of the planet's surface. The blue planet. So you are aware of this, and there is something very interesting regarding a report on fishing presented by United Nations that said that the ocean has a great potential that has not been exploited to help feed the world in the coming decades, and this resource could be used with a much lower environmental footprint than many other food sources. If we make a rapid change and that of great scope in the form in which we manage ocean-based industry while we promote health of its ecosystems, we can reinforce our food security in the long term and the livelihood of millions of people. We have to take into account that this is a water planet. We have to take care of this water. We have that 97% of the water is salty water. Can I have the next slide? There are some concepts of food security. I'm not going to read them all. You are all aware of them. It's just an old topic all the way from agriculture, availability of food, food security, food access, the biological use of food, and the stability of the other three elements in the long term. FAO has also stressed that a peaceful political, social, and economic, stable, and adequate environment becomes the fundamental base that will allow states to give the corresponding priority to food security and the eradication of poverty. This is what we need to understand. We are guilty or not guilty of the actions that are being taking place in our planet. Can I have the next slide, please? As to food sovereignty, other actors such as NGOs and civil society organizations have broadened this concept of food security according to the 6 pillars of food sovereignty. It focuses on food for the people, values food suppliers, locates food system, places control at the local level, promotes knowledge and skills, and it is compatible with nature. Before moving forward, I would like to share this video. My name is Marco Ido Mayorga, and I'm the president of our Artisanal Fishermen Association since 1990. And I have been the president since then. That's almost 31 years, chairing this important organization, one of the most valued organizations in the country. Moreover, we are an important part of a national confederation named CONFEPAS, which is led by my colleague Marcelo Soto in the southern part of our country, which gathers 14 federations throughout our country. Along these lines, I would like to share with you some information. First, in Chile, we have the first woman in the position of Vice Minister of the fishing sector, whom I know very well. She was the director of the National Fishing Institute. Alicia Gallardo, congratulations to her, because fishing in Chile has a woman's hand, and that's very important. We all know that fishing has existed for thousands of years, and it continues being a very important sector from the economic, social, and cultural standpoint, and mainly from the food point of view worldwide, mainly for maritime countries such as ours. Without any doubt, artisanal fishing is one of the productive sectors that guarantees food security of the population at national level. For this reason, fishermen of our country want to deepen small-scale fisheries, which are part of the history of mankind, and become an irreplaceable element in the nutrition of millions of households, mainly in developing countries such as ours. They say that we are the last hunters that remained, and we say this because we have seen, and I don't know if this happens in other countries, but in Chile, artisanal fishing is aging. I think we are above 50 years in average, and we see it, and therefore we don't see a substitution by the youth that thanks to our country's development, now they have an opportunity to study. Last Saturday, as a federation, we have granted 35 scholarships to fishermen's children who are starting in higher education institutions, whether it is in universities and development institutes. Our work as fishermen, thanks to new technology, has a greater presence in national and international markets, as evidenced in the statistics of FAO and of specialized entities, marking the great contribution made by this sector to global food security and its relevant role in the complementarity of food coming from agriculture. Food security not only has to do with the mere extraction of resources, but adding value to them, contributing to food of high nutritional value. Moreover, it is estimated that there are 3 persons in jobs related to each fisherman, which shows economic, social, political, and environmental advantages of small-scale fisheries. Notwithstanding this, as a confederation, we advocate a responsible extraction that will have sustainability of the resources as the north of this activity, contributing to biodiversity of marine ecosystems and favoring their natural reproduction. We are constantly inviting authorities of our country to continue advancing in the prioritization actions for sustainable development of small-scale artisanal fishing and agriculture framed within the needs in the different regions of our country. Each region of our country is totally different, even though we are adjacent regions. However, there's a big difference between one region and the next. The northern, southern, eastern, and western regions are all very different in every sense. Therefore, if we want to request support for the improvement of the formulation of public policy processes, strategic planning, studies management, development plans for sustainable management of the sector, we believe that it is going to be possible in Chile once we create the Ministry of the Sea that will focus its activities in everything and in everyone related to the extraction of resources, whether it is artisanal or industrial. This coming Saturday and Sunday, we'll have the opportunity, given the candidates or constituents are going to be elected, the ones in charge of drafting our new charter, where the sea, food sovereignty, and the right to nutrition should be all included. Well, let's move to the presentation. Can I have the next slide, please? Yes, that one, please. Well, this is our country, Chile. Chile is a country with a coastal line that is one of the most extensive in the world, with a length of approximately 84,000 kilometers, because we need to consider all the islands owned by our country. The maritime space in Chile is 5 times greater than continental Chile. Therefore, we are a land of ocean. In our country, we have 15 regions with a coast, 100 coastal communities with more than 1 million inhabitants, 346 communities there. We have 467 official fisher coves, 92,000 artisanal fishers registered in the Artisanal Fishers Registry, over 13,000 artisanal vessels. More than 90,000 of these vessels are of small-scale fisheries. We have 240 industrial vessels. We have 39 ports and 5 naval bases. Well, what happens in the sea? We need to be cautious. We have convened, and I'm pleased that countries such as Peru, Mexico, and other countries have in their charter at least the aspect towards sovereignty and everything set forth by convened. The territorial sea, the adjacent area, the economic exclusive zone. But this is not only sea. Here we not only carry out the extraction of fishing resources, but we also have a continental platform that is there affected by large conglomerates. That in some countries they are doing marine mining that could affect ecosystems. Can I have the next slide, please? The next one, please. At Valdivia, we conducted a survey, and here we have the results on the effect of COVID-19 in 2020. Here we have some figures. 50.8% has not received state benefits, 93% receive income below the minimum wage, 22% has not been able to work from March to June, 41.3% has received monthly income below 100,000, 74.6% has to fish for self-consumption, and 33% have sought strategies to face the crisis. The most important part is that 22% has not been able to work from March to June, and this has also been the case this year. Can I have the next slide, please? The next one, please. Well, some FAO recommendations. According to FAO, the pandemic has affected the livelihoods of fishers as well as food security of the populations that depend to a great extent on sea products, which are the FAO recommendations that we are putting in place. Improving the hygiene and health in the fish markets during the period after the lockdown or recovery. Increasing public purchases of marine products for institutional use, prisons, hospitals, school programs. In Chile, we have HUNAE, part of a scholarship program where our children receive fish from another country, such as tilapia and pangasius, with a high mercury content, while our local fish, which is fresh and of good quality, is not bought in our own country, as well as distribution for food aid. In Chile and in other countries, food is distributed among the population, but it only brings canned fish, which comes from another countries, while there is another possibility with small-scale fisheries could deliver those products to be included in the family basket, and we are speaking of fresh products. Well, now measures to support the supply chain, social assistance programs, and establishment of a minimum price for species. Can I have the next slide, please? This has been our part in terms of food security. A long time ago, we created a company which name is Peska en línea, which translates on live fishing. There you can see the processing room As I have said, our business is called Peska en Línea. The best products from the sea in the region of Los Ríos directly to your home. Here you can see a couple of ladies who have brought these products. Can I have the next slide, please? 10 years ago, we came up with the idea of a marine food fair called Fegam. And we go to different communities of our region to deliver marine products free of charge. And we teach the population how to consume these products. Basically, our region has only 4 coastal communities, and we are interested in providing fish and seafood to some communities that are not coastal areas. They belong to a region, and there we have had these food fairs, and you can see the people in the queue. And we also organize children's activities. This is what we are doing with respect to giving the population the possibility to taste these products. In this way, we're not spending too many resources in advertising. The money we're not spending in advertising is being used to give them free food to the population. Can I have the next slide, please? We are also working with small-scale agriculture as a contribution to food security in Chile. Here you can see a beauty crop by the Union of Widow, a union that is far away from the city, and it has had interesting outcomes. Our sea is very complicated. It is not like in the northern part. However, we are striving so the fishermen grow crops there. They have dared to carry out these activities here. The next slide, please. Well, we can relate fishing with sustainable development goals such as zero hunger and underwater life. The objective is to put an end to hunger, finish with hunger by 2030, and guarantee the access of everyone, mainly low-income groups, people under vulnerable conditions, including breastfeeding mothers, to a healthy and nutritive diet, one that is enough throughout the year. The idea is to double agricultural productivity by 2030, as well as to double the income of small-scale food producers, mainly women, indigenous communities, family farmers, peasants, and fishermen, among other things, by means of a safe and equitable access to land and other production resources and input, knowledge, financial services, markets, and opportunities for the creation of added value and non-agricultural jobs. This is what I wanted to share with you. I would like to stress that this coming Saturday and Sunday, we're going to have a great opportunity to elect our constituencies, who will be those in charge of drafting our new charter, where the sea and food security will be included. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Marco, for your presentation. Oops, I think I may have to change my interpretation. Thank you very much, Marco. Really a pleasure to hear your perspectives and to learn more about Chile, the work that you're doing. And thanks also for highlighting the challenges that have come about because of COVID-19, but also the opportunities as well to address some of those challenges. Marco's presentation was the last presentation that we had scheduled for the introduction to sort of the scene setting, and now we will be moving into the discussion groups. But I think it's really important, just for your edification, that we have been able to get that broad perspective of what we're talking about when we're talking about food system, how we anchor small scale fisheries and fisher folks within that context, and look to their role as stakeholders, but also as contributors to solutions. throughout the discussions from the three presenters, we've heard the importance of national policies. We've seen suggestions on food system priorities, as well as suggestions in relation to empowering small-scale fishers, with a focus as well on gender and importance of focus on gender. We've also heard of suggestions for capacity building, amongst others. And really, I think this brings together the different pieces to a puzzle as we start to vision pathways to potential national policies that can facilitate sustainable, equitable use of small-scale fishery resources